Allison Colden, Maryland Senior Fisheries Scientist with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Our mission is to improve, protect, and restore the Chesapeake Bay, particularly its water quality, and oysters play a huge role in that. Oysters filter the water and they provide habitat for other species in the Chesapeake Bay, so they're a really high priority for our organization in terms of our restoration programs, our advocacy, and our environmental education. We also have active oyster restoration programs. So every year, CBF plants tens of millions of oysters in the Chesapeake Bay through our spat-on shell restoration programs, as well as working with hundreds of private homeowners through what we call oyster gardening, where they take and keep those oysters at their docks for 6 to 8 months at a time, return them back to us for planting on sanctuary reefs throughout the bay.
David Sikorsky, Executive Director of CCA Maryland. So, working for CCA for about 4.5 years now, a big part of what we focus on is policy related to habitat, but also the trailer I'm sitting on right now is our Living Reef Action Campaign. So we actually build oyster reefs. We place reef balls in the water as well as other artificial substrates to try and propagate the growth of oysters so they can provide ecosystem services and attract fish. Like it says on the trailer, fish today, habitat today, fish tomorrow. Habitat today, fish tomorrow. That's a big part of what anglers, our mindset really is. In doing the work we do in building habitat and involved in policy, I mean, policy is complicated. It's frustrating. There's a lot of passionate folks. There's a lot of folks that come to the table with their experiences and may not understand that other people have experiences too, and feel like their voice isn't heard. That's pretty common in setting policy. So that's complicated. It's not ever as cut and dry or one side versus the other as it often seems.
Other challenges facing the oyster industry are habitat loss and sometimes areas of overfishing. So Chesapeake Bay Foundation works to address both of those issues by constructing oyster reefs in our restoration program. We're trying to combat the habitat loss that sometimes limits the recovery of oysters in particular areas of the bay. And we also work directly with state agencies and federal agencies on supporting oyster fisheries management and policies that ensure that oysters that are harvested from the Chesapeake Bay are done in a sustainable way.
We work in trying to have dialogue and an understanding of where the different parts of the industry are coming from, whether it be wild harvest or aquaculture, and then weigh in based on really scientific guidance as much as possible, but also the interests of the public and anglers that may not be connected to oysters nearly as much as they realize that they should be, maybe. A lot of times this habitat is out of sight and out of mind, so a big part of my job is to try and help educate and make sure folks know where to find information or how to get involved, or do something like they can today, get outside and sweat a little bit and build some habitat. I think it's important that folks kind of engage and have conversation, and so a willingness to do that is difficult, and also just some of the other kind of factors of where we are in history and what we've done before, whether it be overharvest, disease, problems with sedimentation, and a decline in the population in general. Certain terms, conservation, environmentalism, industry, we put these labels on people on purpose because we define ourselves these ways, but really we all have something in common, and I think finding it's the key. And so I'd encourage people to listen more than they offer, in these dialogue with other people that are coming from other parts of this oyster conversation.
One of the biggest issues I think that will affect the oyster resource and the oyster industry in the future is climate change. We expect the frequency and intensity of storms to increase in the Chesapeake Bay region, as well as temperatures. We know that increasing water temperatures means that the water can hold less oxygen, which may exacerbate some of the issues that we see with low dissolved oxygen in the summertime. And the increase in the frequency and intensity of storms means we could get greater freshwater pulses, which can sometimes negatively impact oysters or cause die-off events. We're really concerned about how these issues may affect the oyster in the future, and we're working as hard as we can to restore oysters before a lot of those predicted negative impacts start to really kick in.
I think that we always have to be cognizant of the fact that we all have an impact, and the oyster resource is first impacted, and then ultimately the industry around it is impacted as well. And I think misinformation is probably one of the biggest challenges beyond the actual impact we have on our environment, and I think it divides more often than brings people together to try and find solutions.
So oysters present a tremendous opportunity for improving the water quality in Chesapeake Bay, for protecting and building resilience in communities along the coast in the Chesapeake Bay region, and for improving our efforts in combating climate change. We think that oysters are a multifaceted tool, and that sectors all across the Bay region, from businesses to nonprofits, local community organizations, are going to have to come together to bring back oysters in the Chesapeake Bay.
Conservation, which is really squarely where CCA focuses, because of course it's in our name, it's not about locking something up and throwing away the key. It's about enhancing something for the future, finding reasonable and sustainable ways to use this public resource. I think we should always be asking the question, are we using this the right way for the public, for the future? And so that's something I always tell people to look to. Engage in the dialogue, try and temper the frustration. This work is a marathon. Our world is changing, and we try and understand how, but we can only make a positive impact on the time we have, and I think the best impact's always made by working together, which is easier said than done.